Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here with Patrick. The work we present is also with a couple of other colleagues. Next. And just perhaps 1 minute as a background. Next slide, Patrick. Yeah, so that's our group. Probably would be more department at other business schools. And next slide, what really interests us in the end, that's our university, forgot about it, big University of Technology. And if you want to know more about it, just Google it. I'll keep it with this. Patrick, next. And what really brings us together as a research community in our group is that we're interested in the transformation of established organizations, and it's normally technology-induced change. And so our focus is on incumbents, not so much on startups and how technology changed their business models, their value chains, their organizational setup. Next. And we did a lot of this in the context of Industry 4.0, digital manufacturing, talk more about this in a sec. But then, Mara, you mentioned it at the beginning, what brought us together is the open innovation community. And actually from that, we evolved more recently to these platform-based digital ecosystems, and much more about this recently with Patrick. Together we have an ERC grant on the future of the energy system, but that's a talk in 2 years as we are just starting. But this is exactly why we are interested in this decentralized governance perspective. And then overall with other colleagues in the group, we're also interested in the policy implications of what we do. Okay, next. So my students told me I always have to start with a meme. And in the past, it was all research and development. Next. Then it became open innovation. Next. Then we talked about networks. And now next, it's all about the ecosystem that really drives us. So there's a lot of hype around this topic. And we looked, Patrick was around. It was many years ago, actually, his PhD work. Working together quite a while, was on different open innovation models. And often open innovation was modeled as search, a theory of search strategies. But actually next, what really enabled most of this innovation were platforms. We were not calling, we actually called them open innovation platforms, but we're not so much thinking of two-sided market, but actually they have an intermediary, the orchestrator, bringing together seekers and solvers for search of ideas or technical knowledge. And next, and that was our start in the platform research, that we really looked with Patrick predominantly in the side of the seekers. So the companies acquiring knowledge and to understand how you really from a seeker perspective could operate these platforms better. Next. So by the way, I forgot to start at the beginning. So the idea of the talk is what I talked about. We do a little bit of an overall talk to really inspire you. We'll share a little bit how we came to this, and then Patrick does a deep dive in the recent project. And then more recently, we really took more a real, I would say, modern platform perspective on open innovation in a paper published last year in JPIM, where we really looked from both market sides, what is the optimal design? And that's actually instrumental for our recent research, that we look in design factors that somehow facilitate this interaction between these market sides in a better way or in a worse way. Okay, next. And then in the second stream of research, it really brings me to the core of what my part of the study is today. We're really interested in business-to-business platforms. And it was inspired by this context, Industry 4.0. I don't know if you use in Spain the term Industry 4.0. I learned in some countries we'll talk more about the fourth industrial revolution and so on. But next, the idea was that over these traditional, over the paradigms of how to organize manufacturing from mechanical production, mass production, and the big digitalization wave to cyber-physical network systems that are networked over IoT. Next, what the European community in Japan, they call it Industry 5.0, but we thought that's much too boring to just go to 5.0. So we really in Aachen call it Industry 4.U, Industry 4U, with the idea, that really you use a kind of platform system to co-create for the people and the planet and not just for operational efficiency that very much was in the middle of the 4.0 paradigm. Next, and the context of this research will really be business-to-business platform models. As what you see on the lower part of the buildings, we could say, sadly, from a European perspective, the game is over for us. It's all in the US and in China, and there was been tons of research on digital platforms connecting consumers in all kind of domains. But around 2015, 2012, I think with pioneers, it started that also in B2B, you had these platforms. There were famous initiatives like MindSphere from Siemens, Predix from GE, $1 billion investment in a new division of General Electric with the idea to have a unifying IoT, Industrial of Things platforms across all the industries. German machinery companies like Trumpf, big laser tool manufacturer, opened their platform and so on. But many of them failed. And that was really driving our research interest, as obviously from also an industry policy perspective, probably we can't help German industry to win the consumer platform war, that's settled. But we thought maybe we can contribute, European industries, mid-sized companies to position themselves on these platforms next. And why do we need a different stream of research? I come back to the research policy paper later. But B2B platforms are different. They, overall, we can see what we do in this paper, platforms as meta-organizations, organizations of organizations that coordinate these multiply independent firms. And so that's the first difference in B2B. You have firms. You don't have individuals and consumers, but maybe you have firms and firms working together. And B2B platforms are really characterized by the deeper entanglements. It means whatever they do, they're really connected to the cyber-physical production assets, products, to very high, which is often very high value equipment, proprietary data, mission-critical workflows. If I give you a wrong prediction for your next Netflix movie, perhaps you cancel your subscription, but that's the worst what can happen. If I give a wrong prescription to a flow line in manufacturing, a lot can happen, both with regard to security and with a very high financial impact. And also, we'll come to this later in a little bit more detailed, this traditional magic formula of B2C platforms, the more users you have, the more value you create, and you get up to a winner-takes-all market, seems not really to hold in B2B, as often there may be other factors like reliability, interoperability, regulatory alignment, trust, that are more important than the traditional scale. So these were the conditions, and when we wrote the papers, the reviewers were really pushing us hard to argue why we need a new stream of research for business-to-business platforms. Next. And so in this first project we were interested in was, how does it really happen? As a lot of the B2C platforms were startups, which are now multinational companies, but they started as startups with the idea of a platform-based business model. While in B2B, most players like General Electric, like Siemens, and many, many others start as product-based companies. So with a very specific business model traditionally around the product logic. And but when they move to a business, to a platform, there are new risks, there are new competitors, and so on. And so it's really critical for companies here to know where to position themselves. To really, and we in some of our papers, we take a business model perspective to argue on that. And really for these incumbents, it's very crucial to identify what can they control, what are bottlenecks in the ecosystem, and where do they have to open up, as otherwise the platform mechanics wouldn't work. And at the same time, it's an interesting research that's very much in our heart, and Patrick is leading the business transformation lab in our group, and as said in incumbents, where you need a lot of organizational change. You need dynamic, integrative capabilities, and really master this fundamental logic shift that also brings entire challenges. And this under a condition with high uncertainty is typical for emergent ecosystem. When we started this stream about 10 years ago, actually very little was known about these dynamics. And I don't know, I assume that most of us in the call are based in Europe here. And I was on the platform, the big platform conference at Boston University, taking place there every year, just last year. And I was really astonished to see super, super great papers. But 100% still focus on app, perhaps the gig economy, Uber, and Airbnb, but not one paper on business to business. So I think there still is a lot to room to do. Next, search to do. And one of our industries we really used to study it was the agricultural equipment factor. You would say, why you deal about tractors and so on? Oh, well, actually, this is an industry. You see some of the players here, Claas, John Deere. Claas is a German market leader. John Deere is a global market leader. You have Case, Steyr, and so on. This is the industry that actually became digital very, very early. Next. And this is a picture I took from a wonderful article, actually an older one by Michael Porter in Harvard Business Review, where he described smart products. But this is an industry where you really started to get smart, meaning to equip your products with sensors and actuators quite early, is especially perhaps not a tractor, but if you have a big harvesting device, like shown here on the right, then you use it a couple of weeks only every year during the harvesting season, and then unplanned downtime is a nightmare. So in this industry, they really cared much earlier than in other industries about predictive maintenance, and also these are very, very high value assets often. And we're talking really about industrial farms here, not mom and pop organic farms, but big industrial farms in Brazil, in the US, in France, and so on. And so this is really, really a big asset for them on the books. So they really try to manage the efficiency. And what happened over the last years in this industry is that the products got smart, they got connected, and all the vendors built so-called farm equipment systems, removing, it's like an MES system in manufacturing where you have like a holistic dashboard for all your equipment. That's the perspective of the equipment providers. Next. However, from the perspective of the farmer, the life looks very different. As a farmer, of course, your farm equipment is important, but as important is seed optimization, crop protection, weather data, irrigation systems. So actually, as a farmer, you want a farm management system. And that was exactly the starting point of our research to see where do companies position themselves. Do they stick next? Actually, in this layer number 4, here we see the entire picture, doing a product service system. Are they perhaps actually going to the left side, meaning they just provide the farm equipment and leave all the digital stuff to someone else? Or would they move forward to position number 5 to really become this orchestrator of this farm management system? And it's probably one of the biggest markets in the world. And next, so we really went deep into some, Claas, I mentioned this is one of the companies that should have been earlier. Next. And, but all these companies you saw earlier started to experiment with platforms. And that was really an interesting case for us. As John Deere is a global market leader, you could think so, but Claas also had their own platform called 365 FarmNet. They are a 6 billion family-owned German company. And they now would go in this big, on the number 5 position, really playing around where you have other players like Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer, BASF, huge chemical companies, and very, very highly funded startups that all wanted to capture this farm management system place. But Claas and the others, they all did it. And so that was our empirical field. Next. And just don't go into details, but what you see, it's a very, very different business model, a different logic you have to play from a traditional company that sells machinery with a profit. Well, you do digital, but more on your manufacturing side, on enhanced services. It's all about the IP you own, the manufacturing, the engineers you attract, to your headquarters. While FarmNet, well, it's a platform. The second bullet point, I think, is the most interesting. The family owning the company really understood something, that you shouldn't ask for profits. They said, for the next 12 years, I only will ask you for the numbers of users. This is what we learned from the playbook in B2C. And so it's a freemium model. And actually, we are a software company, but we can outsource most of this to, in this case, I guess it was Microsoft. Remember, as we are small, we have to go to Berlin, get cool people that help us to orchestrate this ecosystem. And so I think this picture somehow illustrates also this logic shift that happens in these companies. Next. And what we then do, and I don't go much deeper in the paper as it's published, we really follow two of these players in this market and really see how assumptions they make about the future of their company. And one company saying, our future is to orchestrate a platform. The other saying, no, our future is to still sell agricultural equipment as a profit. And for this, we may use the platform logic to get digital, services, which would replace physical features in a product. Patrick, we still there, CFI. And follow these two companies over a period of almost 10 years and really monitor the choices. And yeah, next, I think, go in the paper, is the paper somehow ends that one of the players wins. Next, don't go much into this, and gets different positions on the management choices they make. But what I now want to go to bridge to the theme of the topic next was something what happened after we published the paper. And then it got really interesting. And so that's the paper still to be written. And in the end of our research, next, all these competitors joined forces and created a joint, what we nowadays would call a data space. As they actually realized, triggered by the acquisition of Monsanto by Bayer for 40 billion euros, the biggest acquisition of Bayer ever, and 25 billion legal risk for glyphosate. And the main reason for this acquisition was field view, as Monsanto owns the #1 farm management system in the world. And so now these companies realize, oh, we are dealing with a company doing a 65 billion acquisition for a piece of software, and this is our new competition. It's, big chem, but not Claas versus John Deere or New Holland or Case. And what they then realized actually is next, it's a data space. And the data space, I'll come a little bit more into this, is a typical form of the shared governance platforms. A data space is really not a database where all this, the data you have consolidated, but it's a set of architecture that really controls how you can access each other's data. Next, let's see, I have to really speed up. And also what's interesting here is that we found a new form here in B2B. The traditional to all B2C, you have one dominant architecture. Here you now have an alliance, a kind of co-opetition between partners that would jointly orchestrate this. Next, and that really got us interested in a new stream of research. And that was another research policy paper that with some colleagues earlier last year. And we really said there is not this one dominating governance form in B2B, but there seem to be really many different constellations of these design factors. Next, we try to understand this. And I think if you do 2 more clicks that we see the entire paper. So what we look here, no, one back, yeah, that we say there are different platform design factors on how the market is structured, the architecture, the cyber-physical integration. And on the one side, how control and decision rights, not too original, very intuition management, how control and decision rights are allocated. And out of this, next, we could then distinguish 4 different archetypes of governance. And again, I don't go too deep into it, as we were really interested in the one next on the lower right corner, this collaborative governance, where we really saw data spaces and other B2B platforms. We really had a consortium organizing this, and that seemed to be a reason that this may be a better setup to mitigate these issues I mentioned earlier of trust and entanglement. Next. So, and after, yeah, these are just, and behind this governance form were different archetypes of platforms. It's all in the paper on LinkedIn, so I don't go deeper into it. Marsha, I will send you the slides, or you have, so you can share. Next. And yeah, that was our conclusion from really this conceptual paper, that governance must really reinforce, not contradict, the platform design coming out. And it's really in B2B designed for fit, not for scale. It was really to get this alignment, not the traditional plain block of scalability. You build for trust, not for just for transactions. It was very much that you have control parents and whatever to do this. It is not just about network effects, where network effects still rule, but it's about the quality of the network effects. And so who is allowed in matters perhaps more than many. And from this context, next, now I do a very quick deep dive into the recent paper and then hand over to Patrick around what I said, these consortia platforms here. Next. As what we see here is, actually, it's an older term by Eisenman from 2008, where he said there are so-called platforms that he called shared governance platform, where the governance is not the decision of the orchestrator, but of a consortium. The governance is shared among players in the ecosystem. And so they have a more distributed form of design and control runs among a collective or independent organizations. And there are three forms. One are consortium platforms, where just the consortium owns it. Then there are data spaces, like what we saw with Data Connect, Farm Connect, and then the decentralized autonomous organization, DAOs. And I will now spend 1 minute on the data spaces and then hand over to Patrick for a recent paper to go a little bit deeper into the DAO space. So next, let's see, I skipped probably that. Yeah, and the interesting thing of data spaces is that there's a technical architecture. So basically there was a big standardization initiatives heavily funded by the European Commission to really allow companies with these IT infrastructure to solve a lot of the problems companies had with the traditional platform setups in B2B, being that you gave away your data, you were not in control, you lost your sovereignty and so on. So there was this setup coming up that the idea was we have a standardized set of an IT architecture for data exchange. We get a consortium of players that want to exchange data, like our agricultural equipment companies in the example earlier, and we would all benefit from the way that we can do machine learning, AI application with a larger data pool. But still, it's not about giving our data in this big database, but actually we all keep our data, and this IT architecture provides technical principles and some other governance principles to allow each other to access each other data. But as I keep my data and just provide people access, I'm much larger control. That's the basic idea of the data space. And just next, I think we now go quickly forward. Yeah, Catena X is a famous example. Next. Next. Sorry, yeah, that's these technical architecture. Just look it up around the International Data Space Association. But then our challenge, what we found out, is really that even if this is a brilliant design, it seems to perfectly address the issues. The European community gives massive money and political financial support into this. Out of an initial, there's a database navigator with 480 database spaces listed. We looked into 136 and only 10 are still alive. So this seems to be, again, a design issue that we phrase in this new paper by that they're starting with this responsibility, sovereignty by design, but in the end, it's a question of survival, of really viability by design. And next, and then Patrick, I think that's the last. Yeah, go to the end slide. Next, the method. No, on next. Yeah. So so that's the final slide over this. So we really see it. I can just urge you. I think it's a fascinating field of research, especially if you be in Europe. There's a nice community of data space researchers on the computer science, the engineering side. There's very little from the IS or management perspective. Really interesting things to make this work. I stop it here. Perhaps there are questions more, but I now hand over to Patrick for a little bit more focused talk on another form next of shared governance platforms. These decentralized autonomous organizations, which start with the same promise, but have a very different way to organize.